your left is Linda Braddy. Linda Braddy is Vice President for Academic Affairs at Tarrant County College Northeast Campus, where she oversees library, academic support services, academic divisions, including technical programs, and an annual budget of $23.7 million. She previously served as Deputy Executive Director of the Mathematical Association of America, MAA, in Washington, D.C. from 2012 to 2016, where she oversaw MAA programs, public policy efforts, the competitions department, and the meetings and facilities department. While at MAA, she increased the externally funded programs portfolio from $8 million to $14.5 million. She served as Dean of the Division of Health and Natural Sciences at Tarrant County College's South Campus from 2009 to 2011, during which time she assisted with the transition of the nursing program to the Trinity River campus, and subsequently served as Dean of the Division of Mathematics and Natural Sciences on the South Campus. Immediately prior to her tenure at TCC, she was chair of the Department of Mathematics at East Central University in Ada, Oklahoma, as well as a tenured full professor. Through her tenure at ECU, she directed professional development programs for K-12 mathematics teachers and other grant-funded initiatives to improve the teaching and learning of mathematics, directed initiatives to redesign courses and programs, and won multiple teaching awards at the local and regional levels. She received her PhD in mathematics from the University of Oklahoma, and her research area is undergraduate mathematics education. Rebecca Goosen is a developmental educator who has worked with university and community college students in Michigan and Texas for the past 20 years. Presently, she serves as Associate Vice Chancellor of College Preparatory at San Jacinto College. At San Jacinto College, she provides administrative support systems that assist faculty and students in maximizing learning, development, and success. She advocates for programs both locally and at the state level and works to provide a holistic approach to student success at the college. The College Prep program was recently awarded the John Champagne Memorial Award for Outstanding Developmental Education Program in 2016. Dr. Goosen's passion is to build programs that serve underprepared students to become successful at all levels of their lives and to empower faculty, staff, and administration with the knowledge that they can contribute to establishing that learning environment for success. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. All right, so I'm going to begin by having you, I've given kind of an overview of your history, but tell us a little bit about your current role at your college and specifically how it's related to adult and developmental education.
Do I need this closer? Can you hear? You guys didn't answer, so apparently not. I like to say my role at San Jacinto College is ever evolving. Actually, this week my boss called me and said, by the way, can you now handle articulation agreements? So I said, yeah, whatever. But primarily my job there is to watch out for developmental education, put in place programs and structures. I monitor what the coordinating board is always sending out. I change our cut scores accordingly. But I also work with student development, which when I came 20 years ago, we didn't even talk to each other. We kind of did this when we pass each other in the hall. But we have found a place where we understand that for one of us to succeed, the other one has to succeed too. And so we have formed this partnership. So I spend a lot of my time with student development, working on things that we can put in place to support our students. I also travel a lot. I do a lot of national and state presentations. I am the liaison for the coordinating board from our college. Does anybody else have that role? I can always tell you when it's Friday because the emails start coming out of Austin, and it's kind of a joke. It's okay, it's Friday, here come the emails. And so I have been a spokesman for our college around the underprepared student for a long time. I also supervise diverse populations at our institution. And that kind of summarizes what I do, and my baby at my institution is what we do with students who score at ABE 3s and 4s, and it is called Intentional Connections. It is a learning community. Chronicle of Higher Ed just recently did an article about our program and the success we're having with those students. They have their own lounge, like the Honor Lounge, only this is for the other end of the spectrum. And those students, typically, when we started that program 11 years ago, none of them were there at the end of the semester, none of them. And none of them got a credential. Now we have 78% retention and success rates within that first 16 weeks. And so, and then they go on to get certificates and degrees. So we're really proud of what has happened with that particular learning community. So it's kind of what I do.
So I work on the Northeast campus, and I have the privilege of working with these awesome folks in the back, and Janice back there, and Rosalind. I get to work with faculty and deans and chairs on all of the developmental efforts in math and English. And then we also recently moved our operations, our adult basic education operations were in continuing education, and we recently moved those over to academic affairs. And so those are now handled by the folks that I work with. And so I have remained active in national math initiatives since I left the MAA and came back to TCC. My supervisors have been gracious enough to allow me to continue to be involved at that level. So a later question I'm going to tell you about, I was in DC last week for a workshop at the National Academies that will help me. It was perfect timing with this forum to be able to answer one of her questions. So I want to say on the subject of the people that I work with, I want to make sure that you know that everything I say after this moment, however it sounds in terms of we should be doing this or we should be doing that, I don't want any of that to take away from the dedication of our folks and how hard they work, how much they pour their hearts and souls into serving students in academic affairs, student affairs, the district, the campuses, everywhere. They think about this stuff all the time and put a lot of effort into it. So I don't want anything that I say to minimize that or take away from that. But hopefully I'll say some things that challenge you, challenge your thinking, and maybe you disagree with me, and that's okay.
So Dr. Goosen, you had mentioned your Intentional Connections program and the success that you're finding with it. And so I'd like to take a deeper dive into it and learn a little bit more about how you designed the approach and what assessments you put in place to determine its effectiveness.
Well, going back to the beginning of that, it started with a lunch invitation, and I had an invitation from one of my faculty full-time and her part-time cohort person. And they were noticing, they were the first, well, I knew it, but they were the first to bring the conversation forward about what are we doing about these students. They were singing in their classes over and over, they were failing over and over. They were lost in space, so to speak. They had no goal, they didn't know what they were there for, they didn't know what they wanted to major in. And so we had this conversation, and it started out very simply, pairing a student success course with a reading course. And these two instructors did this. They didn't get compensated anymore. It was just part of what they did. And they linked those two classes, and immediately, for that 20 students that we saw in that first cohort, it jumped into the 70s. They were staying through the semester. They had picked majors. Quite frankly, some of our students go home, and that's actually okay, because why would you pay thousands of dollars and never get anywhere because you don't want to be there? How many of you have heard a student say, my mother made me come here? So we have those conversations with them, and we are very honest with them. Those two faculty were tracking everybody on a flow chart, and they actually followed up the next semester with them. They were given them, they were allowed to attend classes for majors they might be interested in, such as criminal justice. And in fact, one of the students who would go to criminal justice class, we had to say, I don't think you can go anymore because you're like auditing the class, because he just wanted to go all the time. That particular student just got his bachelor's from Sam Houston in criminal justice. So he knew going there, he kind of liked it, and he stayed. So we would pair them with somebody in a field they thought they might like, and sometimes they would come back and say, I don't want to do that. I thought I wanted to be a nurse, but you got to touch people, and there's blood and needles, and I don't think so. I didn't know that. But because we're mega majors, we can say, okay, you kind of like health stuff. Well, here's the health fields we have. Maybe a nutritionist might be more what you want. Maybe a physical therapist might be more what you want. So they don't know the options. And for us in Houston, and I'm sure it's the same up here, students don't know the possibilities. They don't know what is out there. So part of this is career exploration, helping them make those decisions early on. It has evolved now. I think our highest enrollment was 600 students in one semester with like 28 learning communities. We have now added reading. So they take a reading, a writing, and a student success course. Some of those they may have the same teacher for reading and writing, or they may not. It may be 2 or 3 teachers involved, and the teachers talk. And they talk about, Johnny came to class today, but he looked kind of weird. And the other one goes, well, yeah, that's because, and they may know the reason. And so then they can create the support system so Johnny can be successful. And they have people say, someone recently said, college prep needs to stop hand-holding. And my reaction was, well, maybe some of the academic people need to start. If you knew me, you know I can be real flip. And that was my reaction, is we do handhold our students, but we also slap them on the back of the hand and say, you can do this, we will support you, but we're not going to do it for you. And so we've just started a whole process of academic coaching where we don't give them the checklist, this is what you need to do. It's more about the relationship we build with our students, it's about the conversation, they are the expert in their own lives. And so let's use you as the expert in your own life, and let's figure out a way for you to be successful, because it's, unfortunately with a lot of the policies, it's one size fits all. And we know that if you have 20 students sitting in front of you, each one of them is completely different. So we have seen this program grow. It is now a district program. If you score at that ABE 3 and 4, you automatically go into this program. Students don't have a lot of pushback, and often students spend 16 weeks in this program and then they can go to college level courses, because what they needed was not the academic piece to it. They needed to get their lives in order. We have huge problems with students living in their cars, and you do too. Students who are hungry, students who have no support system. People going, when they go home, ask them, why are you going to that stupid school? That's not something you need to do. And so here is a place for them to land, and it is called Intentional Connections deliberately, because we are connecting those students to the institution, and in turn our lounge, so to speak, is called the iConnect Center, and it is another place for them to go. We have retention specialists there who take them to the services. Our retention specialists will walk them to financial aid and sit with them, or to walk them to advising and sit with them and hold their hand, so to speak, literally, to make sure that they are getting what they need. So that's pretty much what Intentional Connections is, and it's the idea behind it, and we are so proud of the success rates that we're seeing in that particular program.
Great. So you've talked now about intentional connections and that particular student that you're serving. Can you tell us a little bit about those students who come in ready for co-requisite courses and how you've been implementing them at St. Jacinto College?
We've been doing co-requisites since the demonstration project, and I see 2 of my cohorts from other schools who were in that project with us. And at one point we were handed a program from Texas State that hadn't really been validated. It had run one summer. They said, here, you're going to do it. It was very scripted, down to this is the lesson you do this day, here's your assessments. They told you how to do everything. Well, our faculty decided halfway through the first semester we were not doing well, and our students weren't doing well. So I had to call the co-board and say, I'm out. That was an interesting conversation. But the faculty, this is the great part about our faculty, and yours too, they like this idea of just-in-time instruction. So if you're teaching them a math concept 2 semesters before they're going to use it in college algebra, do you think they're going to remember? So they went in a room that summer. I gave them money to create this, and they created what is known as AIM, Acceleration in Math, and that was our first co-requisite, and that's been about 8-9 years ago. We had tremendous success with it, but to be honest with you, we were taking kids off the top and putting them in that model. So you would come out of Dev Ed with an A or a B, and you were college ready in reading, and we would put you in this program. And we paid for 2 instructors in the classroom at all times. They co-taught. It was very circular. They assessed every 2 weeks. This is basically, guys, just good Dev Ed. It's expensive Dev Ed, which we're finding out now. But the students didn't know who was who. They had 2 instructors, 20 students. They were there every day. These are the things that good developmental educators do. And one of the people in the project came to me, she goes, we figured out that if we assess them every 2 weeks, they do better than if we just give them 2 tests a semester. I offered her Malcolm Knowles' book and said, perhaps you should read this. What we are doing now, many of us did not have the support from before. We were just doing Dev Ed, but we really weren't doing Dev Ed, and is what all this system is. Now we have expanded that model to statistics, to quantitative reasoning, which we changed the name to contemporary math because students wouldn't sign up for quantitative reasoning. It was too scary. And then we have one for finite math. And all of these models have 2 instructors in them. Now the state pays me for 1. They get paid for each class. I'm paying for 2, and then because of our summer pay, we figured out what summer's going to cost us, so we have gone back and re-evaluated it. We've had very good success rates in the statistics, co-requisites in the 70s. College, the algebra one was in the 70s. A few things happened this fall, it fell back to 58%. Some of the things that happened was, when we started this, we had our stars teaching it, the top tier of our instructors. We're now down to the 3rd tier. Doesn't mean they aren't as good instructors. They just didn't have the background that the top tier had, or even the love for what they were doing because they were the creators. We are also seeing students in these courses that we've never put in them before, who don't have the preparation to be there, and that is another reason. And the 3rd reason is we had a group of instructors that decided that if algebra was your capstone, this class was great, but if you were a STEM major, there were things not in that course that you needed to go forward, so they changed the course. Our success rates have dropped. So at our institution, to do any of our co-recs, we have a math R&D and an English R&D, and it's faculty from college prep, it's faculty from the academic side, it is people from student development, it's people who manage our banner system, it's across, and our research people are there too, so it's a cross section, and we make those decisions in that room. It's not made by 1 or 2 people. And what I tell people is when you do a co-requisite, do not think it's done the first time you put it in. We're here 8, 9 years and we are still tweaking it. Our English co-requisite has been very successful. The rates have been in the 85% rate. But again, I am taking the students off the top of that DE range and putting them in it. We'll see what happens next fall when every DE student at our institution will be put in Composition 1. They will either have a 1-credit NCBO or a 3-credit NCBO. I'll let you know how that goes, but that's kind of where we are with the co-recs.
Great, thank you. So Dr. Braddy, we know that you have experience as a mathematics professor, department chair, a dean, a vice president of academic affairs, but you've also served as deputy executive director of the Mathematical Association of America. So based on that kind of varied experience, can you give us a national perspective on mathematics education, trends, promising practices, and even spectacular failures?
So I mentioned earlier that I was, last week I was in Washington, D.C. again for a developmental math workshop. The National Academy of Sciences has never focused on math before. A lot of political reasons for that. And so we were really super excited that they decided to do this. So it was a 2-day workshop. There were people there who were nationally recognized sort of experts in developmental education and math. And so the workshop was actually live streamed, and I expect in about a week or 2 I'll have a link for it. And if you're interested in seeing it, I would really encourage you to watch it because there's hopefully some convincing data presented. And so I was charged with, one of my roles was to do the opening panel to sort of do an overview and set the stage, and then my other role was to be a panelist on the closing panel to summarize what came out of that workshop. And so one of the questions we were given was, what's our vision for 2030? And so, so I'll share some of that with you. And I mentioned earlier that I don't want anything I say in this context of a national perspective to disparage what's going on in our community colleges in North Texas and at TCC in particular, because lots of really great people are working really hard on this. But as I was thinking about spectacular failures ahead of time, I think that perhaps our current older methods, but some of us still our current methods of developmental education are not serving all students well, and so there's an equity issue there, and so we have spent a lot of time studying ourselves, looking at data, thinking about how to improve things. And so we're definitely moving forward, but I think the only spectacular failure is if we had stayed with what we were doing before, as we did for some period of time, and now we're moving forward, so that's a good thing. The other failure that I think sometimes happens with us is our hesitancy to accept data from other institutions, because we say things like, well, our students aren't like theirs. And really, if you think about it, I would be curious to hear your thoughts some other time about how different do you think community college students are across the country, really? I mean, do you really think that they're that different? You know, we know that there are differences in the tiers of types of institutions, right? Research universities, four-year regional universities, maybe even private community colleges, but public two-year community colleges, we get a lot of the same kinds of students. And so I want to encourage all of us to be more minded and willing to look at and take the data that's being circulated nationally rather than reinventing the wheel all the time. So as mathematicians, I don't know how many of you all are math folks in the audience, just out of curiosity. Okay, so you know, as mathematicians, we're trained to prove things from first principles, right? So we don't really, so we reinvent the wheel a lot of necessity, right? But I would encourage us to leave that model behind when we look at what other people are doing. And so, again, if you want to see some convincing data from across the country, from places like us, then I would encourage you to watch this workshop. And so there were people who were presenting data on co-requisites, on math pathways, and on actually multiple measures for placement. And so we all know placement's a problem, right? And so California community colleges have taken a look at, they're doing a multiple measures where it's pretty simple. They look at the high school GPA and the highest level math course the student took in high school. And they have more than doubled the success rates for students going into college level math their first semester, because so many students are underplaced. And I've heard a lot of skepticism in the past few years about, well, you know, high schools inflate the GPAs and that doesn't really mean anything. Well, apparently not in the way we would think anecdotally, right? And so again, we should have a healthy skepticism for the data, but on the other hand, when there are really well-designed studies with really strong, overwhelming data, I would encourage us to really take a hard look at that. So that was one of the things. The math pathways, you know, there are math pathways within the context of guided pathways. And so the math pathways traditionally have been the algebraic pathway, and then you have maybe a couple of options that are non-algebraic. You have the quantitative reasoning or contemporary math, whatever you call it, to get students to take it, and statistics, right? Well now, so if you're in math, you probably know Uri Treisman from UT Austin and the Dana Center. And a lot of that was started there with them at the Dana Center and the Carnegie Foundation. And so he is saying that math pathways need to evolve. They should evolve. It shouldn't be a static, we only have these three. So one of the newest ones that's being developed in other places is for nursing and allied health majors. So they're coming up with a nursing pathway. So be thinking about that in the context of the guided pathways. There's no reason to limit ourselves to three. But one of the big things that there seems to be a lot of concern among math folks is about the rigor issue. That when we start doing these co-requisites and when we do the pathways, and we funnel students away from college algebra, somehow these other courses are not rigorous. And so one of the pieces of our vision for 2030 at this workshop that we summarized at the end was that college algebra and calculus, culturally, in our perception, will no longer be the default equated to rigor and nothing else is. There will be other things that we understand are rigorous and good for students. And so that's a partnership between student affairs and academic affairs to advise students into those other pathways and not feel like we have to prepare every student in case they might decide later on they want to be a STEM major, because we're not serving all students well when we do that. So let's see. Another big conclusion was college math for all, their first semester. So developmental education will no longer exist. We know that there's a stigma associated with that language for students. They say, I'm an idiot at math and that kind of thing. And so they also are discouraged because they're not getting credit for their classes, that kind of thing. So we would, in 2030, we would be using artificial intelligence software and diagnostic tools to figure out what every student needs, and they would go immediately into, we also said college literacy for all on the INRW reading and writing side. But we would know exactly what they need, and we would provide that support just in time remediation you mentioned. So we would have really no need for the placement that we have to deal with now. We would know what they need, and we would place them in the correct pathway that's appropriate for their career, and we would place them immediately into a credit level course, and they would have the supports that they need. Let's see if there was anything else I wanted to share with you about that. Oh, a lot of our discussion centered on the equity issue, and I'll talk about it a little bit later if we get to it. That there's research, there's national research that shows that we have implicit biases in the way we advise students into co-requisites, standalone courses, that kind of thing. And so some of the data that we've looked at so far at our institution, I'm sure that that's some of the reasons why we're seeing the results that we're seeing. And so perhaps the more effective methods, perhaps the co-requisites, because there's overwhelming evidence at the national level that parallel remediation, the just-in-time remediation, is a lot more effective than serial remediation, where we do the developmental course and then we do the credit course. So there's lots and lots of evidence for that. So it doesn't mean that we're sort of bad people because we work in a system where there are a lot of inequities as far as the populations of students who have access to the better types of instruction or whatever. But we just need to be aware of all of that and take a look at our data on a regular basis.
All right, so I want to now throw a two-part question to both of you. On one, you talked a little bit about the things you envision for 2030, and I'm expecting that those are also things you would consider would be the best practices, the things that you would do if you could rule the world, right? And so I want each of you to say, if there were no structural or financial limitations, what do you think would be the best model to support students who enter college and who may have some gaps in their readiness? And then after you've given us the pie in the sky piece, tell us what, given our current structural limitations and mandates and all those kinds of things, you think are most important for us to work towards putting in place first. So I start either way.
Pie in the sky. I'm not going to talk about the academic challenge that we have here. We understand that we have students coming out of K-12 that are underprepared, and hopefully, your president just talked about some of the things that are happening legislatively. My question has always been, what do you want me to do with someone who walks in my door, he's 18, he has a brand new, ink's not dry on his high school diploma, but reads at a 4th grade level, doesn't understand the number line, and can't write a complete sentence. So we have that, that's a given. But we can, developmental educators are amazing people. We can help them learn all of that. Our biggest challenge right now is the rest of their lives. As I mentioned, we have students living in their cars, students who don't have food, students who don't think they're worthy of being at a college. You know, they have people telling them you're not college material. And I think that is, if I could have my druthers, I would have one advisor / academic coach / financial aid person, whatever you want to call them, 1 per 10 students in an institution. Now that costs money. And I know Alamo has hired a bunch more advisors for case managers. But it's more than telling them which classes to take. It's getting them to the services they need so that when they end up in your classes, they're ready to do their math. You know, some of our students, they tell us their story and you think, how did you ever get here? if I had your life, I would go home in bed and crawl under the covers. But there's something in them that wants them to get an education. So when they come to us, we have to be prepared. You know, I'm an old fogey, but there are people older than me say, well, that's not my job. My job is just to give them content. I'm just going to write all the math problems on the board, and if they don't get it, it's their problem. No, it is your problem. It's your problem to help them learn, and it may not have anything to do with their math ability. It may have to do with the fact that they've worked till 8 o'clock in the morning and they're sitting in your 9 o'clock class. How can you structure your instruction to serve them? You know, when I came to San Jac, we had faculty that would lock the door if their class started at 9 and it was 9:01. Well, I've worked all night. I went home and took my kids to their school. I didn't even eat, and I showed up. And I'm 1 minute late, and I can't come into class. Or I've worked all day, and I fought traffic in Houston, and I haven't had time to eat. We have faculty that actually make sandwiches to have in their class. So it's providing those things that are not necessarily academic, but I contend they affect your academic performance. How many of you have ever heard of when you go to take a test, eat breakfast before you go? And I actually was a facilitator for math when I worked at Ferris State University in Michigan, and I would prep the students to come take the test. And I would say to them, and they always thought I got hired because I looked like their mother. That's what the guy told me. I said, okay. So the night before test, I would say, okay, you should have done this, and this to this point. Read through your notes tonight, go to bed early, get up in the morning, eat breakfast. When you come in to the test, do a mental dump of everything you need to know up in the corner, and you'll be good to go. Well, people laughed at that, but that's true. It was all this non-cognitive kinds of stuff that our students face, and this was at a university. And then they would come in and do their little mental dump, meaning, you know, the equations they were going to have to use on that test. Their scores went up. Now, isn't that amazing when we treat people like human beings and not a number? How well they respond. We have students, our iConnect centers are overflowing, and it's not just with intentional connection students. Other students have found that space because we are kind, we will help them. It is their rock in a very bad storm that they deal with. So that's what I would use the extra money for. The other side of that, what was the other side of the question?
So that's what you would think would work best, but given the environment you're in now, do you feel like intentional connections is the thing that you've chosen, or are there other things you also think would be important?
There are other things. I think we have to realize too, I think you touched on it briefly, is this access to things. You know, some of us do have different populations of students. Many of our students are the same, but when I deal with a student, for instance, after Harvey, I lost 30% of my enrollment that next spring. And my chancellor called and said, why? Like I knew that, right? And I said, well, my guess is these students, and we're in this vicious cycle in the state of Texas, they live in communities that have lower performing high schools. And because they're lower performing, they get less money from the state because of performance. And my guess is the students that I lost were from those neighborhoods. So we have these IR guys that are amazing. So they took a map of Houston and put it over the neighborhoods. Any neighborhood that had 30 inches or more of rain in Houston is where I lost my students. And that correlates with their poverty level. So I think we need DevEd, but not DevEd in the way it's been. It's not these long lists of courses. I think we can move some students up into co-requisites. We use multiple measures. Some of our students skip the whole thing and go into college level courses, but we have to have the time and the understanding of who they are and what kind of support systems they have. If you put them in all college level courses and they're working a 40-hour a week and they've got 2 kids, and then you ask them, so when are you going to study? Some of this can be accomplished through technology because they're going to be doing their homework at midnight. So where are they going to ask their questions? Part of this is taking this co-requisite model, and by the way, our Hispanic women have done very well in our co-requisites because they do a great deal of this in the classroom, guided by the instructors. So when they walk out, they're done with math for the day. They can go about their business and do all the other things. So I think it's important as we move forward, and what we're given is that we put in the structures to support them, because it's more about adding the numbers than it is and writing that complete sentence. It's about showing them where you're going to use this. I have contended that Pathways is probably more impactful than the co-requisite model. One of my people one day said to me, well, a high school or a college degree is not worth anything unless you have college algebra. And I said, should I give all 4 of my degrees back? And she says, what do you mean? I said, I've never taken college algebra. Now, let's look at the statistics courses I've taken. There's a whole bunch of those, because that's what I needed for my profession. So are we making decisions based on, I talk about looking through our lens, are we making those decisions based on what we think they need? Or are we having that conversation with them to try to figure out what they need? Remember, they are the expert in their life. And that's where academic coaching comes in. It's asking those powerful questions instead of telling them. Things as simple as, so if you took algebra or you took stats, what's your life gonna look like? How's that gonna do your degree? You don't answer that, you let them answer that. And they find their way and it becomes powerful, because what we need to do is train people to be good at life, not necessarily to be able to write a wonderful essay, but they have to know how to do life. And I think that's our biggest goal here, is giving them the tools so they can be successful in life.
All right.
Okay, that's great. So I want to ditto the wraparound services aspect, that it would be, so I had the opportunity to send these questions out to folks in our district to get input from them, which was great. And so someone suggested a life coach, that you can have a life coach. And
It's an academic
financial, academic,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So, and there would be a really small ratio of, number of students to faculty, number of students to, advisors, that kind of thing, but those wraparound case management type environment. The math pathways, we would have math pathways figured out from kindergarten through career. We would have no more silos with K-12, 2-year institutions, 4-year institutions. There'd be no more repetition of courses unnecessarily. There would be no more blame game. There would be no more unproductive competition. It would all be focused on serving the students the best we possibly can. We could serve students, and resolving issues of alignment and even calculator usage. Some of those issues were mentioned to me as problematic. If we had a statewide and even a nationwide system of data that we could use for comparison purposes in a positive way for improvement, so that we could identify who's doing a really great job and what can we learn from them, and then who's really struggling and what can we learn from them, and that sort of thing. Again, there are a lot of similarities in our students, even though there are some differences. And so we could use that big system of data that everyone had access to. One thing that we haven't talked about as much, we've talked about the structural type of the courses, co-requisites, we talked about the pathways. We haven't really talked about instruction and evidence-based pedagogies. And so I don't know how many of you all have read the Freeman Report. It's called the Freeman Report, and so probably if you're in math, you have. And so this group of researchers did a meta-analysis of over 200 studies in STEM disciplines, all math, science, and everything. And they looked at, they compared traditional lecture, where it's all lecture, okay, to anything else, right? It involved anything other than just straight lecture. And there's overwhelming evidence that shows that anything that actively engages students on any level is so much better and so much more effective than lecture. So one of the things that I want to mention, maybe later, I don't know how much time we'll have, but I'm going to sneak it in here, is that the Freeman Report talks about how if this were a medical study and we had a control group and an experimental group and we were giving this experimental drug, that at this point in the study, the evidence of the effectiveness of the experimental drug is so overwhelming, we have to stop the study and give everybody the experimental drug. So Freeman says that's where we are with active learning. The evidence of active learning being so much more effective than lecture is so overwhelming that if we don't stop lecturing and give students the experimental, active learning components, that's educational malpractice. Just like that would be medical malpractice in a medical study. And so I have challenged our folks with that before on campus. I got a lot of raised eyebrows about it, but I just want to throw that out there as a sort of a challenge to you all to consider that. So encouraging productive failure, encouraging a growth mindset, ensuring that students feel a sense of belonging. There is lots and lots of research for all that stuff being important in student success. I also have another video I can send you if you'll email me. We had Catherine Good, who was a student of Carol Dweck's on growth mindset, and she was on campus in January, and so she was there for, I don't know how many, I guess about 3 hours that she did with us. And so I can send you that video if you'd like to watch it. She had great things about, and Pearson has now put some videos in their math software. There's a video called The Power of Yet. So if you just say to students, well, you're not there yet, like the power of that one single word can completely change their perspective. Instead of, well, you're not there, you got a long ways to go. Instead, if it's, you're not there yet, you just have to do maybe a little extra to get there, that kind of thing. So it's not coddling, but it is changing how we think about these things. So the power of our instructional practices and using evidence-based instructional practices, I think, is huge. So as far as what we can do, that would be if money were no object. One other thing I wanted to mention that Rebecca mentioned earlier was about paying faculty. So we have some concerns about staffing related to, okay, if we're going to do co-requisites, we would really like to be able to have the credit teacher also teach the developmental piece. But then if we do that, what happens to all of our wonderful adjuncts who are not credentialed to teach credit? What do we do about that? So if we put them together, paired them up, and both of them got paid for both courses or both types of instruction, then perhaps we could utilize the skills that those developmental instructors have that perhaps the credit folks don't have as far as the really fundamental math concepts and how to teach those. So if money were no object, that would be nice. And you said it's super expensive.
This was our professional development, and the academic math people would say, I always thought I was a good teacher until I taught with them. Yeah. And then they learned how to do this interactive. But yes, because the state only pays you for one.
Right. So that's expensive.
So you eat the cost, yeah.
Right. So if money were no object, that would be maybe something to consider. So as far as what we can do, smaller class sizes would allow more student-faculty interaction, more tutors in our tutorial labs. We even have one of our campuses, maybe more, they're having the tutors come to class and help interact with students there. We have supplemental instruction, those kinds of things. We have to, I think that institutions have to commit, and we have to commit to changing our view. We cannot go through life with a fixed mindset when it comes to the view of how the brain works. We have to develop a growth mindset in ourselves about our students, that intelligence is not fixed. The brain is plastic, it's malleable, they can learn and grow. So if we go in and say, well, they just don't have the math gene, that's not a productive way to interact with students. We have to have a commitment to learning ourselves and implementing the evidence-based practices that abound. And the institutions have to be committed to supporting us in that professional development. Faculty advising is not anything I've said anything about yet. That's one thing that we're doing. We have faculty supervisors, and they work in the summer. And from what I've heard from our student affairs folks and our faculty, they love it. They love working together. That issue of tearing down the silos and working across those areas, those functional areas for the benefits of the students, that just seems to be an amazing thing to do. So I would encourage more of that. That's something we can do now. And then a commitment to robust data analysis and focusing on using data to inform our decisions, and not superficial completion data, but more in-depth analysis, working with your institutional research folks and using that to inform our decisions, and doing that on a term-by-term basis. Not at the end of 3 years, we'll go back and look and see what happened. No, every semester, get together with everybody that has a stake in this and talk about it and think about what do we need to tweak right now? I mean, there is value in sort of doing something for 3 years and looking at it, but there's also value, I don't know if we have that long, right? So we want to tweak it as we go along and make decisions as we go along as well. Okay. Awesome.
Okay. So hopefully you found some validation in the things that you've heard, things that you're already doing, or inspiration to try some new things. At this time, I want you to join me in thanking our panelists for sharing this moment.